in the past, it felt very much more like, and in our personal games, like you were a person that had something happen to them. Everyone was almost like a folk hero, back in the day, in the stories that we told, right? You were kind of an ordinary person that had extraordinary circumstances happen to them that drove them into a life of adventure that seemed to never end. And after you hit a certain point, there's like no going back. You can't just be a regular Cuddy anymore. Right. You're out there gaining, power and prestige. And that's like the early days of our gaming and RPG experiences.
I'm Nerdarchy Ted.
I'm Nerdarchy Dave.
Welcome to Nerdarchy, for nerds, by nerds. All right, so today we're talking about being a D&D adventurer. What does it mean? And, what do we do about it?
All right, so let's jump into the inspiration for this video was, and I kind of thought about it when I was responding to comments over on the YouTube channel here, where you are watching, and someone was, and it was for like the metagaming video, and someone was like, well, I think, commoners really wouldn't know about monsters and special abilities and stuff like that, but adventurers would. And I was like, well, would they? Like, what is an adventurer? What's the difference between someone who's a commoner or, just lives in the city as a blacksmith and someone is an adventurer? Are they two different groups of people? Or is it something else? Like, so that really kind of like got me thinking.
So, like, you've got the aspect of, is it a circumstance? Is it an occupation? Like, we have a background, when we build our characters mechanically. So, like, at some point in time, there is a separation between I'm doing a job and I'm starting my own business to go earn coin and a lifestyle elsewhere.
Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, that's just it, too. Like, is adventuring, is that another type of profession, or is it just a lifestyle? All right, because you have all different types of characters essentially with different skill sets, doing that lifestyle kind of, it's not like your job. I've never saw your job as being a fighter or being a wizard.
Right. And there are some aspects, some characters that I've seen that could very easily be lifted up out of the adventuring lifestyle and put into, I run a library, I work at a church, I do. But there's many other character types that you just like, I can't put you into any other block. You don't fit in a city in any easy, any way to just have a life. So you're forced to go down this road. So it does create this, kind of, a spectrum of, are you something different? And what is the perception there?
Warlock for hire. That's what I am. But what do? I warlock. So like this kind of got me thinking too. It's like, there's just like in earlier editions of the game, the character started off a lot less powerful, right? So there was so I feel like with each edition of the game, your starting characters get further and further away from the rest of the civilization, the rest of society. Even in some of the games that I've played in now compared to when I used to play before, things like quest boards were never a thing in our games, in previous editions, or even any of our games really. Like there was no going to the quest board to find a job to go on an adventure. It's something to me that's been a lot more modern.
Yeah, I think it's definitely a more, at least from our perspective, it's a newer concept. If you guys have been doing it in your games for a long time, then so be it. But it's not been our experience. There you go.
Well, so you actually come from a background of LARPing. You used to do a lot of LARPing back in the day. When you guys played roles and LARPed, were you adventurers? Like, how did that work?
Yeah, so that's an element that is, definitely different, where there were gathering points, because you have to look at, entertaining the player. So as a story writer, your GM, if you will, from the LARP perspective, you had less number of NPCs and you had PCs that were running and entertaining the story. So in the first game that I went to, which was Mystic Realms, you would have Guild Hall and all of the players, the people who paid to be there, they would go to this building and they would socialize and hang out and prep and do all the things that they were going to do. Well, a commoner, little easy person to kill and rob that was absolutely against the law, would come into town and they would have, oh my God, I need insert quest thing here. And they would bring a party of adventurers away from Guildhall to be able to go off and do a quest. And there would be X number of trails for them to, kind of explore. And once that mission was complete, they would be paid for their service and, they would go, the adventurers would go back to Guildhall. The hook, as it was referred to, out of game mechanically, would then, check in with the NPCs who were setting up the module, everything go okay, let's reset up, and then they would go and get another crew. It was typically run 2 or 3 times before, that group would then do a meal break and set up a whole new thing so that they could entertain more people. And it was an element where if this particular NPC came in and said, oh my God, I've got praying mantises attacking, if you were part of that first group, you have to come up with a reason why you wouldn't be able to help that person because you've already gone and done that quest. It's an out-of-game type scenario, but it was absolutely a NPC comes to town with a quest hook and takes things away, similar to a quest board. So when we created our own LARP, Epic Crusades, that, went for quite a number of years.
I would say that's different than a quest board, right? Because a quest board very much is just like you go to it, take the job, go to the job, where the quest giver, right, is a completely different thing. They're quest givers.
Yeah, they were quest givers, but it was still a scenario of, like, the board was the edge of the trails, and all you had to do was wait for an NPC, similar to like waiting for someone to come and tack up a job, and it was an element of extrapolation of like, okay, well, this is what we have to do. This is how the game flows for that style of Friday night and Saturday, till Saturday afternoon essentially.
So the people hanging out at the Guildhall in the town, right? What were they considered adventurers? Like, did they consider themselves adventurers? Did they call themselves adventurers? Was the commoner like, "Hey, you group of adventurers," or were they like, "Hey, I am Lothar the Hill People, and I'm just chilling"?
So you in that game, you are tradesmen, and tradesmen are absolutely something that was above a commoner. A commoner could not be resurrected. If they died, they were done. There's no coming back to life. And it was an element of having a trade, being a rank 1 tradesman, automatically meant that you were above and beyond because you had more skills, more abilities, and essentially your soul has been fortified with this, potential.
So you said, when you started your own LARP and started running one, you did it differently?
So we had an element of similarity, where there were still things that would, come to town to help out in quests, because with any LARP that I'm aware of, there's always less NPCs to entertain. So you have to figure out what is the formula, how can you entertain the most amount of people with the least amount of resources? And usually that resources meant people.
Well, was it also treated the same where they were still like, they were the adventurers, right? Whether you call them adventurers or tradesperson,
sure.
These were the commoners.
So there was definitely a difference, within it because you held more power, but we didn't have the hardcore breakdown between adventurer and, not adventurer. But you could definitely see it in a sense of power and presence and what have you. But if you came to town saying, I need help, it means, all right, you're somebody that's usually not having enough clout to be able to handle the problem yourself. So there was definitely that kind of mentality that you needed people who were gathered here because the people who gathered here were above and beyond. So before we go any further, if you happen to, like our videos and you want to help support them and all the awesome content over on nerdarchy.com, why not come check us out on Patreon and support us over there?
As a special thank you, every month you'll receive 5E rewards for DMs and players alike. We've got drop-in encounters. We make magic items. Sometimes we turn them in, print and play magic item cards. We're making subclasses, races, feats, spells, items, you name it. We're making it over there. Not only that, there's also a chance to game with us, Nerdarchy. If you want to check it out, up in the cards below, a link in the description, you will find a Patreon download sampler. You can try it before you buy it.
All right, so let's kind of get back to the tabletop aspect, and let's look at more about what you brought up in regards to adventuring in the past versus kind of how adventuring is considered now.
In the past, it felt very much more like, and in our personal games, like you were a person that had something happen to them. Everyone was almost like a folk hero, back in the day, in the stories that we told, right? You were kind of an ordinary person that had extraordinary circumstances happen to them that drove them into a life of adventure that seemed to never end. And after you hit a certain point, there's like no going back. You can't just be a regular cuddy anymore. Right. You're out there gaining, power and prestige. And that's like the early days of our gaming and RPG experiences. Now, with each edition, first, second, third, fourth, fifth, it seemed like more and more power was given to those low-level characters. So the divide between the ordinary citizens of the world and the player characters became, deeper and deeper.
So I look at this as kind of more of a, big world, small person in the older style, which is now it's almost like, a big hero in a small world where it's so easy to just be like, oh, well, I'm a cut above everyone else. Back then, campaigns always started at level 1. What do you mean you're going to start at level 3 or start at level 5? The game starts at 1, man. That's where the story is. Like, utterly blows my mind away to kind of look back and see this difference. Now it's no big deal. You want to start higher? Boom, let's do it. Let's go for it. And the stories that we're told are also far more grandiose. You don't always need to go and save the world or save the town or whatever have you. Back then, we never got to the things that were big enough to destroy the world. Like, we were dealing with, this small time scenario. You might save the town as like, level 10, but level 3, level 5, no, can't.
The necromancer took over the mine and, murdered everybody. And, he's still mining with the zombies.
That's your adventure. You got to kill zombies and, survive the encounter with the wizard. And that was, the other side of it, the wizard. Dear God, you have 1, maybe 2 spell slots, of spells that you can cast before you're out. Otherwise, you have your D4, usually minus your Constitution, modifier, not plus. So it was like, how many hit points did Steve have at level 15?
Well, I think it was level 5 or 7, but he had like 15 hit points, right? Which is very, very different than what we're used to now. Like, you could start off with a first level sorcerer or close to those hit points.
So it was utterly crazy how hard it was for wizards to survive back in those days. Whereas, now it's like, oh, well, with the battle map and with, all the tactical preparations that can be set up and, the not doing theater of the mind, so the ogre can't just appear on the other side of the party to whack and destroy your spellcaster. It's so much easier for those casters to survive to those higher levels. But cantrips, no, we didn't have them back then.
Yeah, that would come about later. So the style of play was a lot different, and it really has changed. I would say, especially as we started doing Nerdarchy and being exposed to more gamers, and that's where I really started seeing the quest billboard pop up a lot more, and you could just go into town and it's there. And also things that became very tropey throughout the years of gaming actually started to become actual parts of the game. And that's why I think Adventurer went from being this thing that happened to you to being this thing you were from the beginning, and almost like its own occupation and job or lifestyle that you would just do, because players started taking the tropes and really embracing them, taking things from MMOs, putting them into your tabletop role-playing games. Like, back in the day, everything was very like medieval Western style, and like, I feel like those players are very much like, oh, you can't do that. That's not realistic towards those times or whatever. But, more modern gamers are like, what are you talking about? We're throwing fireballs and fighting dragons realistic. Nothing's realistic. This is the hill you're going to die on. The sword's not right. So what? And I kind of have to agree with them.
Sure. And, I still remember like the old play style of, that almost realistic aspect where like in medieval times, most folk did not know how to read, so like that was the way that we kind of played. So a quest board, like how would somebody be like writing something down? Parchment costs money, ink costs money, and I'm just going to go nail this up and hope that somebody's going to come help me. How many people are going to walk by this and have no idea what it says? I mean, how many different adventurers in second edition, like reading, the ability to read was part of your class. Like you either could or could not. So like,
if you played a barbarian in first and second edition, you had to be illiterate. I don't remember if in third edition they could read or not.
I think you had to purchase it, but barbarians, I believe in, somebody's going to, tell us one way or the other, but I don't believe barbarians could. Unless you specifically selected it.
Spend a skill point to do it or something, yeah.
So with the danger of, what it means to be an adventurer, and, you talk about it like, oh, it's almost from birth, it's kind of there. But like, who makes the association of like, yep, I want to risk my life to go off and, be a hero or to do this dangerous thing?
Well, yeah, that's why like in the early days, it was kind of the circumstances that dictated. Like you didn't go off and become an adventurer because you're seeking fame and glory. You did it because something happened. Your town was attacked. You had to defend your family. You were like thrust into these extraordinary circumstances, and you rose to the occasion. Where now it's like, no, you're extraordinary, and you just deal with these circumstances that are normal to you, which are like orcs attacking or, putting down evil demon cultists or whatever.
So those are elements that, are always worth kind of considering, and to see the kind of change throughout the editions definitely, is eye-opening.
I will say, I do remember in AD&D, like my first DM and Forgotten Realms, kind of introducing this concept of the adventuring company. My DM didn't introduce it, but he introduced it from Forgotten Realms. And it was like a formal contract you might have with a group, almost like a mercenary band, but sometimes smaller.
Sure.
And it's like, matter of fact, you see it in The Hobbit, right? Like, this is how we're dividing the treasure. If anyone dies, this is how we handle it, right? So that's like the adventuring. So to me, like, that was the closest thing to being like, oh, you're an official adventurer.
Right.
But it was almost more like you're a mercenaries and you had a charter.
Right. But I mean, I will say, like, back in those days, like even if you were an adventuring company, there weren't names associated, not the way we played. We didn't title the group. Whereas like,
well, we didn't, but in the Forgotten Realms you could definitely find them.
Yeah, okay. So it was, that was, fairly new to me. It wasn't like, I think the first time that I really came across that concept was within the, the Dritz novels of, the Companions of the Hall, as they were referred to.
Yeah, see, but that wasn't actually an adventuring company because they were just like, they had a title for their group, but it wasn't a formal thing where it was contracted.
Right.
Although I could see maybe Brunard doing that. But, yeah, so it wasn't, I don't think I saw it novelized so much as it was like in the campaign settings and the lore that way. Mm-hmm. It wasn't something we really did in our games.
Right.
And we never played in official settings. We always played homebrew stuff.
Right. So I guess our final question here is like, how does 5e D&D skew the perspective on this adventurer versus the other editions?
I think it just, I mean, I have to admit, begrudgingly, I think that it just puts you in this place where you are adventurers because they are so much better than, you know, anything else in the game. Like, you know, the commoners are so beneath where a you know, adventurer is, you know, any of the classes really now. Like in third edition, they introduced this concept of NPC character classes, right? And you had you had the commoner, you had an expert, there was a spellcasting version, right? And there might have been one more. It might have been like a warrior, right? Just like this is like a town guard, and they could progress and they could get better, but they were never good as like the character classes. Almost like the sidekicks that were introduced in 5e, right? Like that would be kind of comparable. And so you know, in third edition, there was like a little bit. That was one way of kind of closing it, because you could have regular people that were like half a class almost. Where in 5e, you know, I just feel like the chasm is so vast now between the commoner and the adventurer. Yes, it's almost like they're their own breed of being in the you know, modern gaming.
You know, and those are aspects to kind of look at. And, you know, even if like, you've got a sidekick or an NPC, you know, class extrapolated into 5th edition, they're not, as you said, they're not going to measure up to what a character of an equivalent level is going to be able to do. You know, we look at the aspect that a lot of people have talked about, that 5e almost treats D&D like they're superheroes. I mean, they're not.
Or Beowulf. Beowulf would be like, and Beowulf's companions would be like a good example where they were like so far beyond everybody else.
Right. You know, and those elements where like, okay, you really are up here, you know, you're on that next level, you know, you've got the ability to survive things that, you know, most people wouldn't even dream of. And that's getting, you know, into the element of like, well, how do you survive a meteor swarm, a fireball, a lightning bolt, you know, dragon's breath? All of these things is like, you know, it's utterly preposterous when you look at, you know, it from that perspective. But, you know, like the idea is you've got enough experience, you've done enough to really, you know, get there. But that's what the mechanics say.
Yeah, so what is your thoughts on adventurers in D&D? Are they like everybody else, but you know, just something happened to them? Or nope, they just start off better. They're always destined to be more, you know, this kind of like the superhero analogy. Let us know what your thoughts are down in the comments below.
While you're down there, don't forget to like, share, subscribe. Go ahead and click on that notification bell so you don't miss a single video.
Quick reminder, Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays we drop new videos here on the channel, so come on back. Hey, you can't wait till then? No worries, we got you covered. There's a card up here. Check out why Nerdarchy doesn't run official D&D adventures.
So until next time,
Stay nerdy.